She gave half her bread to a man slumped by a dumpster, never imagining he was a vanished millionaire. Soaked from the rain, she had nothing left to offer, except kindness, and that simple gesture changed both their lives forever. A story of generosity, redemption, and quiet strength. Of two strangers, broken in different ways, who helped each other remember what truly matters. Get ready, this one will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell us where you're watching from. Sometimes, the smallest act of generosity can break through the thickest walls we build around ourselves. Rain drummed against the windows of empty storefronts, transforming the evening streets into rivers of reflected neon. Eleanor Matthews stood beneath the awning of a closed bookshop, watching droplets cascade from torn canvas edges. She clutched her tote bag close, feeling the damp edge of her resume through the fabric. Another rejection. Fifth one this. The paper was beginning to curl at the corners from humidity, just like her hope was beginning to fray at the edges. She glanced down at her phone. 6:42 p.m., battery at 8%. One missed call from her landlord. Elena slipped it back into her pocket before the screen could dim completely. Better to save what little power remained. She hadn't eaten since yesterday's dinner, a can of soup stretched with extra water. The coins in her pocket had been carefully counted that morning, just enough for a single loaf of bread from Marino's bakery. Half for her, half for Mr. Rossi, the elderly man who lived across the hall and whose pension checks sometimes arrived late. The weight of generational beliefs pressed down on her shoulders as heavily as the rain. "You're not meant for big things, Elena," her mother had always said, not unkindly. Better to be good than great. Better to be kind than successful. What her mother had really meant was, don't reach too high, because the fall will hurt more. Elena stepped out from under the awning, her worn flats immediately soaking through. The cold seeped between her toes as she trudged forward, umbrella tilted against the driving rain. Port Haven's lights blurred around her. Once a thriving fishing town, now caught between fading tradition and tourism that came and went with the seasons. The smell of Marino's reached her before the sight of it, warm yeast and sugar, a phantom embrace in the cold afternoon. Elena paused outside, looking through rain-streaked windows at families huddled over coffee and pastries. Warm light spilled onto the sidewalk. She didn't allow herself to linger. The bell chimed as she entered, and old Mr. Marino looked up from behind the counter. His face softened with recognition. "Eleanor," voice gravelly from years of weather's miserable. "Just need a loaf today, Mr. Marino," she said, fishing the counted coins from her pocket. "The sourdough, please." His eyes, webbed with lines earned through 70 years of early mornings and late night, held hers for a moment too long. He knew. In a town this size, everyone eventually learned everyone else's stories. He'd watched her grow up, seen her graduate with honors, celebrated when she'd gotten the scholarship to university. He'd also witnessed her return 3 years ago, shoulders bent with the weight of her mother's illness and funeral cost. "Just out of the oven," he said, sliding a paper-wrapped loaf across the counter. He didn't count the coins she placed in his palm. "Added a little extra today. Good for the stomach." Elena's throat tightened. "Thank you." Outside again, she tucked the bread carefully into her tote, positioning it away from her damp resume. The smell of it made her stomach clench painfully. She would walk the long way home, past the community center. Maybe Ms. Alvarez would need help organizing tomorrow's senior lunch program. At least then, she'd be busy, useful. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but the wind had picked up, driving what remained beneath her umbrella. Eleanor hunched forward, each step a determined push against the elements and her circumstance. She'd applied for 3 more positions that morning: administrative assistant at the medical clinic, evening shift at the gas station, substitute, teaching at the elementary school. The rejection from the bookstore had stung most sharply. Books had been her refuge since childhood. As she approached the back alley behind the row of shops that separated the district from the residential area, Eleanor slowed. A figure huddled near the bakery's dumpster, partially hidden by stacked wooden pallets. Most people would have hurried past, eyes averted. Port Haven had seen an increase in homelessness over the past few years. Shipyard closures, rising rents, the opioid crisis that had seeped into even the most picturesque coastal towns. But Eleanor wasn't most people. She moved closer, umbrella tilted against the wind. The figure, a man, sat with his back against the brick wall, one arm wrapped protectively around his ribs. His clothes were soaked through, his shoes falling apart. A graying beard couldn't hide the pallor of his face or the weariness etched in. "Are you okay?" Eleanor asked, voice barely audible over the wind. She knelt beside him, ignoring the cold water immediately seeping through her pants. The man looked up, startled. His eyes were a startling blue, incongruously bright in his weathered face. Something about them seemed oddly familiar, though Eleanor was certain they'd never met.
I'm fine. Just resting.
Eleanor didn't believe him. Up close, she could see how he cradled his side, the slight grimace with each breath. Without hesitation, she reached into her bag and withdrew the bread, carefully breaking it in half. The steam rose between them, carrying the scent of comfort. "Here," said, offering him the larger portion. "It's still warm." The man stared at the bread, then at her face, as if trying to understand a complex equation. "You don't know me." "I don't need to," Elena replied. She placed the bread in his hand and adjusted her umbrella to shelter them both. "Can you walk? There's a clinic 3 blocks from here." "No clinics," said quickly. Too quickly. "No hospital. Please." Elena hesitated, weighing her options. "The community center, then. It's warm and they won't ask questions. I volunteer there." He looked away, considering, then gave a small nod. Elena stood, extending her hand. After a moment's hesitation, he took it, his grip surprisingly strong despite his apparent condition. As he rose, she noticed him wince again, his free hand going to his side. "I'm Elena," steadying him with a hand on his... "Jack," he replied after. "Just Jack." They walked slowly, Eleanor matching her pace to him. Neither spoke. The rain had almost stopped, but the wind still whipped around them, carrying the scent of salt from the harbor. Twice Jack stumbled, and Eleanor felt his weight briefly against her shoulder before he righted himself, muttering apologies. She couldn't have known then how that simple act, stopping when others walked past, sharing what little she had, would alter the course of not just one life, but many, including her own. She couldn't have known that Jack Sullivan, the man who looked like a drifter, had once been Jonathan Sullivan, founder of Sullivan Technologies, who had disappeared from public view 2 years ago after walking away from his empire at the height of its success. That, beneath the soaked jacket and worn jeans, was a man who had once commanded boardrooms and been featured on the covers of business magazines. She couldn't have known that he had been watching Port Haven for weeks, drawn to its isolation and anonymity, living spartanly from a modest account while the bulk of his fortune sat untouched. Or that, 3 nights ago, he'd intervened when 2 men attacked a teenager behind the liquor store and had taken a knife to his ribs for his trouble. All Elena knew was that someone needed help, and despite having almost nothing herself, she offered what she could. As they approached the community center, a weathered building with a mural of the harbor painted across its front, Jack slowed his steps. "I should go. Already begin." "You're hurt," Elena countered. "And it's getting cold. Just come inside, warm up, have some coffee. Then you can go wherever you want." Jack looked at the building, then back at Elena. Something in her expression, the genuine concern, the complete absence of judgment, made him pause. "1 cup of coffee," he conceded. "Then I'm leaving." Elena nodded, relief evident in her face. As she led him toward the entrance, neither could have anticipated what that single cup of coffee would set in motion, a chain of events that would challenge everything they believed about themselves and each other. Inside, the community center hummed with quiet activity. A group of elderly residents played cards in one corner. 2 teenagers huddled over a chessboard. A young mother helped her child with homework at a table strewn with textbooks and colored pencils. The air smelled of coffee and the lingering aroma of the lunch program's vegetable. Ms. Alvarez looked up from the reception desk, her expression shifting from welcome to wariness as she spotted Jack. "Elena," gaze flicking between them. "Everything okay?" "This is Jack," Elena explained. "He got caught in the rain. I told him he could warm up here for a bit." Ms. Alvarez's expression softened marginally, but suspicion lingered in her eyes. The community center welcomed everyone, but newcomers, especially those who looked like they'd been living rough, were always approached with caution. "There's coffee in the back," she said after a moment, "and I think there's still some soup left from lunch." "Thank you," Elena replied. She guided Jack toward, feeling Ms. Alvarez's gaze. The kitchenette was empty, for which Eleanor was grateful. She motioned for Jack to sit at the small table while she poured 2 cups of coffee. When she turned back, she found him examining the space with quiet intensity, noting the patched linoleum, the mismatched mugs, the bulletin board covered with community announcements and job lists. "Sugar?" she asked, setting a mug before him. Jack shook his head. "Black is fine, thank you." Elena sat across from him, wrapping her cold fingers around her own mug. Now that they were in the light, she could see him more clearly. Despite the beard and disheveled appearance, there was something refined about his features. His hands, though dirty, showed no calluses or signs of manual labor. And when he spoke, His voice carried an educated cadence at odds with his appearance. "You volunteer here?" he asked, taking a careful sip of coffee. 3 days a week, Elena nodded. "More when I can. They do good work." "And when you're not volunteering?" Elena's smile faltered slightly. "Job hunting, mostly. I was in English literature, not exactly high demand in Port Haven." "Why stay then?" The question was direct, but not unkind. Elena considered her answer, running a finger along the rim of her mug. "My mother got sick my junior year. I came home to care for her. After she passed, there were medical bills, the mortgage. By the time everything was settled, going back to finish my degree seemed..." She shrugged. "Impractical." Jack nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry about your mother." "Thank you." Elena took a sip of her coffee, then set the mug down with a determined clink. "Now, about those ribs. Let me at least take a look." "It's nothing," Jack insisted. "You've been holding your side since I found you. That's not nothing." For a moment it seemed he would refuse again. Then, with a resigned sigh, Jack carefully lifted the edge of his shirt. Eleanor's breath caught. A crude bandage, what looked like a torn t-shirt, was wrapped around his torso, a dark stain visible along one side. "Jack, that needs medical attention." "It's just a scratch," lowering his shirt. "I've dealt with worse." Elena's response was interrupted by the appearance of Ms. Alvarez in the doorway. "Elena, do you have a minute?" Her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. "I'll be right back," Elena told Jack, then followed Ms. Alvarez into the hallway. "Elena, honey," Ms. Alvarez began once they were out of earshot, "I know your heart's in the right place, but we don't know anything about this man. He's hurt, Ms. Alvarez, and he has nowhere to go, at least for all the more reason to be cautious. We have children here." Elena glanced back toward the kitchenette. "I don't think he's dangerous, just down on his luck." Ms. Alvarez's expression softened. "Like your father was?" The question hit its mark. Elena's father had struggled with alcoholism for years before finally finding sobriety when Elena was 12. Those early years had been a cycle of promising beginnings and devastating relapses, of her mother's unwavering support, even when it came at great personal cost. "Not everyone can be saved, Elena," Ms. Alvarez continued gently. "And not everyone wants to be." "I'm not trying to save him," Elena protested. "Just help him through tonight. The shelter on Pine is full because of the weather, and he needs somewhere warm." Ms. Alvarez studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "He can stay in the back room, just for tonight. But if there's any trouble..." "There won't be, thank you." When she returned to the kitchenette, she found Jack standing by the bulletin board, studying the job listings with a furrowed brow. "Good news. You can stay here tonight. There's a cot in the back room." Jack turned, surprise evident on his face. "You don't need to do that." "I know I don't need to," Elena replied, "but I want to. And tomorrow, if you're feeling better, maybe we can talk about what comes next." "What comes next?" Jack repeated. The words holding a weight Elena couldn't quite... "You always this trusting with strangers?" Elena considered the question. Not trusting, hopeful maybe. She gestured to his side. "And practical. You're hurt and it's cold outside. The rest we can figure out tomorrow." Jack looked as though he wanted to argue further, but instead he simply nodded. "One night, then I'll be out of your way." "Deal," Elena said, offering her hand. After a moment's hesitation, Jack took it. His grip was warm and steady, at odds with his weathered appearance. As their hands met, Elena had the strangest sensation, not of helping someone, but of standing at the edge of something significant, a threshold she couldn't yet see beyond. Later that night, as Elena walked home through streets now quiet and empty, she replayed the events of the day. The rejection letter, the bread from Marino's, the man in the alley. Her mother would have approved of what she'd done, Elena thought. Her father, too, once he'd found his way back to himself. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, wincing at each creaking step. Mr. Rossi's door was closed, but light shone beneath it. She knocked softly, and after a moment heard his shuffling approach. "Elena!" he called through the door, his Italian accent still strong after 50 years in America. "It's me, Mr. Rossi. I brought you some." The door opened to reveal a small man with wispy white hair and alert eyes behind thick glasses. He smiled at the sight of her. "Ah, my guardian angel," gesturing her inside. "Come, come, I made tea." Elena followed him into the apartment, a mirror image of her own, but filled with photographs, books, and the collected treasures of a long life. She placed the half loaf of bread on his counter. "Fresh from Marino's. Still good, even though it got a little damp." Mr. Rossi picked up the bread, inhaling deep. "Perfect. Tomorrow I make you proper bruschetta. No argument." Elena smiled. No argument. They shared tea at his small kitchen table, talking of the weather, the neighborhood gossip, the book Mr. Rossi was currently reading. Elena didn't mention her job rejection or the man at the community center. Some burdens were hers alone to carry. When she finally returned to her own apartment, fatigue settled over her like a physical weight. The space was small but clean, furnished with a mix of her mother's old pieces and thrift store finds. Bookshelves lined every available wall, the one luxury Elena allowed herself. She changed into dry clothes and curled on the couch with her journal. In it, she recorded job leads, budget calculations, and occasionally, when she couldn't help herself, ideas for the small business she'd dreamed of starting since college. A bookshop cafe that would host community events, writing workshops, and children's story hours. A place that would celebrate Port Haven's rich maritime history while looking toward its future. Tonight, she wrote about Jack, about the incongruity of his refined speech and rough appearance, about the sadness in his eyes that seemed to run deeper than circumstance, about her own inexplicable certainty that helping him had been the right decision, despite Ms. Alvarez's concerns. As she closed the journal, Elena wondered where Jack's journey had begun, and what series of events had led him to that alley behind Marino's. She wondered, too, what tomorrow would bring for both of them. She couldn't have known that the man now sleeping on a cot at the community center was wondering the same thing about her. Morning arrived with tentative sunlight and the distant cry of gulls. Elena woke early, as was her habit, and prepared for the day with practiced efficiency. Today, she had 3 goals: check on Jack, drop off applications at the hardware store and the new cafe opening near the harbor, and pick up groceries with her carefully budgeted $20. The community center was already bustling when she arrived. Wednesday was senior program day, and the main room had been transformed with card tables and chairs. The air smelled of coffee and the blueberry muffins Ms. Alvarez's daughter brought each week from her bakery in the next town over. Elena found Ms. Alvarez in her office, sorting through donation receipts with a furrowed brow. "Morning," Elena said, hovering in. "How's our guest?" Ms. Alvarez looked up, her expression unreadable. "See for yourself. He's in the storage room." Elena's stomach clenched with anxiety. Had Jack caused problems after she'd left? But as she approached the storage room, a glorified closet really, filled with folding chairs, craft supplies, and holiday decorations, she heard the unmistakable sound of tools against metal. She found Jack kneeling before the community center's ancient copy machine, a screwdriver in one hand and a panel removed from the side. His borrowed cot had been neatly made, his few possessions, a backpack, a water bottle, tidily arranged beside it. "Good morning," Elena said, announcing her presence. Jack looked up, and Elena was struck by the transformation a night's rest had made. Though still bearded and wearing yesterday's clothes, there was a clarity to his eyes, a precision to his movements that hadn't been there before. "Ms. Alvarez mentioned this has been broken for months," he explained, gesturing to the machine. "Thought I'd take a look. You know how to fix copy machines?" A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Among other things, Elena watched as Jack carefully replaced the panel and stood, wincing slightly as he straightened. "Should be working now. Just needed to clean the sensors and reset the system." "That's impressive," Elena said, genuinely surprised. "Where did you learn to do that?" Jack's expression closed slightly. "Here and there. Picked things up along the way." Before Elena could press further, Jack changed the subject. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and sincere. "For yesterday, not many people would have stopped." Elena felt a flush of embarrassment. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Jack said. "They wouldn't. I sat there for hours before you came. Plenty of people walked." The certainty in his voice made Elena uncomfortable. She'd been raised to believe that kindness was ordinary, expected. The idea that her actions had been exceptional somehow didn't align with her worldview. "How are your ribs?" she asked, deflecting the implied praise. "Better. Still sore, but the bleeding stopped." "Will you tell me what happened?" Jack hesitated, then shrugged. "Wrong place, wrong time. Saw a kid getting hassled behind the liquor store. Stepped in." "You got stabbed helping a stranger." "Just nicked," Jack corrected. "And the kid got away, so..." He shrugged again, as if to say it had been worth it. Elena studied him with new eyes. The man before her was a puzzle, part drifter, part good Samaritan, with unexpected skills and an air of mystery that raised more questions than answers. "Are you hungry?" she asked finally. "Ms. Alvarez's daughter brought muffins." Jack's stomach answered for him with an audible growl. He smiled ruefully. Apparently, yes. They walked together to the main room, where several seniors had already gathered for their weekly social. Elena felt their curious gazes as she led Jack to the refreshment table. Ms. Alvarez watched from across the room, her expression wary but no longer openly suspicious. "Eleanor, dear," called Mrs. Whittaker, a sprightly octogenarian with a penchant for bright scarves and bolder opinions. "Who's your handsome friend?" "This is Jack," Elena replied, feeling oddly protective as all eyes turned toward them. "He's new in town."
Well, come sit with us, Jack, Mrs. Whittaker insisted, patting the empty chair beside her. "We love fresh blood at these gatherings. Gets tiresome hearing the same old stories from the same old faces."
"Martha," protested Mr. Fitch from across the table. "Speak for yourself. My stories improve with each telling." Good-natured laughter rippled through the group. After a moment's hesitation, Jack took the offered seat, balancing his coffee and muffin carefully. Elena watched with a mixture of amusement and curiosity as the seniors immediately began their gentle interrogation.
"Where are you from originally, Jack?" asked Miss.
"All over," Jack replied vaguely. "Moved around a lot." "Any family?" A shadow crossed his face. "Not anymore." Mrs. Whittaker patted his hand sympathetically. "Well, that's the thing about Port Haven. We're good at making family out of neighbors." Jack's discomfort was palpable, but he managed a polite smile. Eleanor, sensing his unease, intervened. "Jack was just fixing our copy machine, the one that's been broken since Christmas." This revelation successfully diverted attention from Jack's personal history to the seemingly miraculous repair of equipment the center could never afford to replace. As the conversation shifted, Elena caught Jack's grateful glance. She smiled in return, a silent understanding passing between. For the next hour, Elena moved among the seniors, refilling coffee cups, helping with craft projects, and occasionally glancing over to check on Jack. To her surprise, he seemed to be warming to the group, listening intently to Mr. Finch's fishing stories and Mrs. Whittaker's recollections of Port Haven before the decline of the shipyard. When it was time for Elena to leave for her job application, she approached Jack, who was helping Mrs. Whittaker thread a needle for her knitting project. "I have to go. Be here when I get..." Jack looked up, his expression unreadable. "Do you want me to be?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. Did she want him to stay? She barely knew this man, yet something about his presence felt significant, like finding an unexpected character in a familiar story. "Yes," she decided. "I think I do." Jack nodded slowly. "Then I'll be here." As Elena walked to the harbor, where the new cafe, Harbor Lights, was preparing for its grand opening, she replayed that strange moment in her mind. There had been something in Jack's eyes when he'd asked if she wanted him to stay, a vulnerability at odds with his otherwise guarded demeanor. Harbor Lights was a charming space with wide windows overlooking the water. The interior smelled of fresh paint and newer wood, with nautical touches that managed to be tasteful rather than kitschy. Eleanor found the owner, Sophia Chen, arranging mason jars of wildflowers on reclaimed wood tables. "Can I help you?" Sophia asked, looking up from her work. "I hope so," Elena replied, extending her application. "I saw your help wanted." Sophia took the papers, glancing over them. "Eleanor Matthews. Wait, aren't you the one who tutors kids at the community center?" Elena nodded, surprised to be recognized. "On Thursdays and Saturdays, yes." "My nephew, Matteo. You helped him with his reading last year." Sophia's expression warmed. "He wouldn't stop talking about how you made books come alive. Said you did all the voices." A flush of pleasure warmed Elena's cheek. "Matteo's a great kid. Quick learner, too, once we found books that interested him."
"Well," looking again at the application, "that's quite the coincidence. I actually need someone to manage them, someone responsible, good with people." She gestured around the cafe. "We're trying to create something special here. Not just a place to grab coffee, but a community space."
Elena felt a spark of excitement. "That sounds wonderful. Let me think about it. I have a few more interviews scheduled, but I'll call you by Friday, okay?" "That would be perfect," Elena replied, hope tentatively unfurling within her. "Thank you for considering me." As she left Harbor Lights, Eleanor allowed herself a moment of optimism. The cafe seemed like a good fit, close to home, in a beautiful location, with an owner who already knew of her through Matteo. Perhaps her luck was finally changing. The hardware store interview went less promising. The owner, Mr. Reynolds, barely glanced at her application before explaining that they really needed someone with more muscle for stocking shelves. Elena bit back a comment about her perfectly adequate muscles and thanked him for his time. By the time she finished her grocery shopping, carefully selecting items on sale and calculating the total in her head as she went, it was mid-afternoon. Eleanor's thoughts returned to Jack as she walked back toward the community center. Would he still be there, as promised? And if so, what then? She found her answer as soon as she entered the building. Jack stood on a ladder in the main room, replacing a flickering fluorescent light, while Ms. Alvarez supervised from below, handing him tools from an ancient toolbox. "Elena!" Ms. Alvarez, spotting her in the doorway. "Your friend is quite handy. Fixed the copier, unclogged the sink in the women's restroom, and now this." Jack glanced down, offering a small wave that nearly cost him his balance. "Just earning my keep." Elena set her grocery bags on a nearby table, watching as Jack secured the new light fixture with practiced movements. There was confidence in his hands, a certainty that spoke of experience rather than luck.
"There," descending the ladder. "Should last you a good while now." Ms. Alvarez beamed, her earlier suspicion apparently forgotten. "You're a godsend, Jack. We've had that on our maintenance list for months, but the budget," she shrugged eloquently.
"Happy to help," Jack replied, his discomfort with praise evident in the way he immediately began gathering the tools, avoiding eye contact. Elena approached, curiosity overcoming her natural. "Where did you learn to do all this?" Jack's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their task. "My father was a handyman," he said after a taught me the basics growing up. It was the first personal detail he'd volunteered, and Elena sensed there was more to the story than he was sharing. But before she could probe further, the front door burst open, admitting a whirlwind in the form of a young girl with unruly curls and a purple backpack. "Ms. Eleanor!" the girl exclaimed, rushing forward. "I got an A on my book report. Mrs. Stewart said it was the best in the class." Eleanor knelt to receive the enthusiastic hug, genuine delight warming her face. "That's amazing, Lily. I knew you could do it."
"I used all the tips you gave me about character analysis and thematic elements," he continued breathlessly. "And I didn't even stutter during my presentation. I'm so proud of you." Voice thick with a Lily had been struggling with a speech impediment that made classrooms of anxiety. They'd been working together for months, building confidence through reading aloud and discussing. Jack watched the interaction from a few feet away, his expression softening as Lily proudly showed Elena her graded report. There was something in the way Elena spoke to the child, attentive, respectful, without a hint of condescension, that revealed her character more clearly than any words could have. When Lily finally departed with promises to return for Saturday's tutoring, Eleanor turned to find Jack still watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing," shaking his head. "Just, you're good with her."
Eleanor shrugged, uncomfortable with the observation. "Lily's special, smart, creative. She just needs someone to see past the stutter." "Someone who believes in her," Jack added quietly. "That can make all the difference." There was a weight to his words that suggested personal experience, but before Eleanor could respond, Ms. Alvarez called from her office. "Elena, phone call for you." Puzzled, few people called her at the center. Elena excused herself. She returned several minutes later, her expression a mixture of disbelief and cautious joy. "Everything okay?" Jack asked, noticing the change. "That was Sophia Chen from Harbor Lights," Eleanor said, still processing the news. "She's offering me the manager. Said she cancelled her other interviews after checking my references." "That's wonderful," Jack said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "When do you start?" "Monday. Training for 2 weeks, then taking over the morning." Eleanor shook her head, amazed at the sudden turn of events. "I can't believe it happened so." Jack's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sometimes luck changes when you least expect it." Something in his tone gave Eleanor pause. "Did you have something to do with this?" "Me?" Jack looked genuinely surprised. "How could I? I've been here all day." Elena studied him, uncertain why suspicion had flared so suddenly. Perhaps because good fortune had been so rare lately that she'd forgotten what it felt like. Or perhaps because there was still so much about Jack that remained unknown. "Right," she said finally. "Of course, I'm just not used to things working out." Jack's expression softened. "You deserve good things, Elena. More than most." The sincerity in his voice made her cheeks warm. To hide her confusion, Eleanor glanced at her watch. "I should go. I promised Mr. Rossi I'd help him with his grocery delivery tonight."
"The elderly gentleman from your bill?" Jack asked, recalling their earlier
Elena nodded. "His arthritis makes it hard for him to carry things up the stairs." "Let me help," Jack offered. "It's the least I can do after everything you've done for me." "You don't have to." "I want to. Please." There was something in his expression, an earnestness, a need to be, that Elena recognized all too. How many times had she volunteered her own time and energy simply to feel that she mattered, that her existence made a difference, however small? "Okay, thank you." As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, Ms. Alvarez pulled Elena aside. "He can stay another night," she said quietly. "The board approved an emergency handyman position this afternoon, temporary, just until we find someone permanent. Minimum wage, but with the room in back." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "That's generous." Ms. Alvarez shrugged. "It's practical. We need the help, and he needs a place to stay. She hesitated. Be careful, Elena. There's something about him. I know, Elena admitted. I can't quite put my finger on it either. Not that he seems dangerous, Ms. Alvarez clarified. Just out of place, like he belongs somewhere else. Elena glanced over at Jack, who was carefully folding a tarp they'd used to catch debris from the light fixture. There was a precision to his movements, a thoughtfulness that seemed at odds with his circumstance. I'll be careful, but I think he might be exactly where... Ms. Alvarez raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. Your mother always said you had good instincts about people. I hope she was right.
So do I, Elena murmured.
Outside, the afternoon had mellowed into early evening. The air smelled of salt and approaching rain, though the sky remained clear. Jack fell into step beside Elena as they walked toward her apartment building, a comfortable silence settling between them.
You don't have to tell me your story, Elena said suddenly, surprising herself with the directness. But I'd like to know who I'm helping.
Jack's stride faltered momentarily before resuming. What makes you think there's a story?
Everyone has a story. Some are just more complicated.
Jack was quiet for so long that Elena thought he might not answer it. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost confessional.
I had a company once, he said, built it from nothing, watched it grow beyond anything.
Elena waited, sensing there was more to the story.
Then I walked away, Jack continued after a moment. Left it all behind.
Why? Elena asked, unable to hide her surprise.
Jack's eyes focused on something distant, beyond the weathered storefronts they passed. It stopped being mine, became something I didn't recognize something I didn't want to be part of.
That must have been difficult, Elena said, walking away from something you...
Easier than staying, Jack replied. At least, that's what I told myself. He glanced at, a rueful smile tugging at his lips. Been drifting ever since, trying to figure out what comes next.
Elena considered his words, turning them over in her mind like seas, smooth on the surface but with edges still faintly discernible. There was truth in what he'd shared, she was certain, but also significant omissions. Still, it was more than she'd expected.
Thank you for telling me that much.
Jack nodded, his gaze returning to the sidewalk ahead. Your turn.
My turn? Your story, he clarified. Fair exchange.
Elena smiled faintly. Not much to tell. Born here, left for college, came back when Mom got sick. Now I'm just surviving, I guess.
You're doing more than surviving, Jack countered. The community center, the tutoring, helping your neighbor. That's living with purpose.
The observation, delivered so matter-of-factly, caught Elena off guard. She'd never thought of her life in this. To her, it had always felt like treading water, maintaining without progressing.
I suppose, though it doesn't feel that way most days.
They reached her apartment building, a 3-story structure from the 1940s, its red brick faded to a muted salmon. The front steps were cracked, the railing loose despite Mr. Rossi's repeated complaints to the landlord.
This is me, Elena said, unnecessarily, pausing at the entrance. Mr. Rossi's on the 2nd floor. The delivery should be here any minute.
As if on cue, a small truck with Morton's Market emblazoned on the side pulled up to the curb. The driver, a teenager with acne and a perpetually startled expression, recognized Elena and waved.
Ms. Matthews, got Mr. Rossi's order right here, and yours too.
Thanks, Tim, Elena replied, moving to help unload the bags. Jack joined without being asked, easily lifting the heavier items. Together, they carried the groceries up the creaking stairs to Mr. Rossi's apartment. The elderly man answered Elena's knock with a broad smile that faltered momentarily when he spotted Jack.
Mr. Rossi, this is Jack, Elena explained. He's helping at the community. Jack, this is Antonio Rossi, best cook in Port Haven and keeper of its most interesting stories.
Mr. Rossi's expression warmed at the introduction. Any friend of Elena's is welcome here. Come in, come in. I made cannoli. Jack glanced at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. Go ahead. I'll get my bags upstairs and be right back. While Jack followed Mr. Rossi into the apartment, Elena continued up to her own floor. Her space felt particularly empty after the warmth of the community and Mr. Rossi's enthusiastic greeting. She quickly put away her meager groceries and returned downstairs, the sound of laughter guiding her back to her neighbor's door. She found Jack seated at Mr. Rossi's kitchen table, a half-eaten cannoli before him, and a look of genuine delight on his face.
Elena, your friend knows about boats. He was just telling me about the summer he spent working on a fishing vessel in Alaska. Is that so? Elena raised an eyebrow, adding this to the puzzle that was Jack. I didn't know that.
Many things we don't know about each other yet, Jack replied, his gaze holding hers for a beat longer than necessary. The evening passed pleasantly, with Mr. Rossi sharing stories of Port Haven's golden days when the shipyard employed half the town and fishing vessels lined the harbour. Jack listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that revealed an unexpected knowledge of maritime history and economics. The trouble with towns like this, Mr. Rossi said, gesturing with a piece of bread, is they get stuck in the past. Can't see the future for remembering what used to be.
What do you think the future?
Mr. Rossi shrugged. Not for old men like me to decide. For young ones like you and Elena. But I think, he tapped his temple meaningfully, it must honor what was while embracing what could be. This town has soul, character, just needs new purpose. Elena watched the exchange with growing curiosity. Jack's questions seemed motivated by more than politeness, and Mr. Rossi, usually reserved with strangers, had warmed to him immediately. When they finally took their leave, night had fallen completely. The hallway outside Mr. Rossi's apartment was dimly lit, casting long shadows across the worn carpet.
He's a remarkable, Jack said as they descended the...
He is, Elena agreed. Came here from Italy when he was 20, worked in the shipyard for 40 years. His wife passed about 5 years ago. She smiled sadly. He says the building feels like a ship now. He can hear every creak and groan. Jack paused at the bottom of the stairs, his expression thoughtful. What about you, Elena? What do you want for Port Haven's future? The question took her by surprise. I don't know that my opinion matters much. It matters to me, Jack said. Elena considered her answer carefully. I think Mr. Rossi's right. We need to honor our history while finding a new path forward. The town has so much potential. The harbor, the surrounding forests, the community itself. She hesitated, then added, I used to dream of opening a bookshop cafe, something that would be both a business and a community space, a place where traditional stories could be preserved while new ones are created. Jack's eyes lit with interest. That sounds wonderful. Why used to? Elena's smile turned wistful. Reality. Startup costs, business loan, the practical challenge of making a bookstore profitable in the digital age. She shrugged. Dreams and practicality don't always align. They can, Jack said, with a certainty that seemed to come from experience, with the right approach. Before Eleanor could respond, the building's front door opened, admitting her landlord, Mr. Chambers, a perpetually disgruntled man with thinning hair and the perpetual scent of cigarette. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Jack. Ms. Matthews, he said, ignoring Jack completely. Rent's due Friday. I know, Mr. Chambers, Eleanor replied, fighting to keep the irritation from her voice. You'll have it, full amount. Mr. Chambers grunted skeptically before continuing past them. Jack watched him go, a frown creasing his forehead. Pleasant fellow, he commented, once Mr. Chambers was out of earshot. He has his moments, Elena replied diplomatically. Very few of them, admittedly. They stepped outside into the cool night air. The street was quiet, most businesses already closed for the evening. In the distance, the lighthouse beams swept rhythmically across the harbor. I should get back to the center, Jack said, though he made no move to leave. Thank you, Eleanor, for helping with Mr. Rossi and for telling me a little about yourself. Jack studied her face in the soft glow of the streetlight. I haven't been honest with you, he admitted quietly. Not completely. I know, Elena replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. But you will be, when you're ready. Something shifted in Jack's expression. Relief, perhaps, or gratitude. I'm not used to this, he said after a moment. To what? Being seen, he answered simply. Being known, even a little. The vulnerability in his voice touched something in Elena, a recognition of a shared loneliness, though their circumstances were undoubtedly different. It's late, suddenly conscious of the intimacy of the moment. Will you be okay getting back to the center? Jack smiled, the tension breaking. I think I can manage. Good night, Elena. Elena watched as he walked away, his figure gradually blending with the shadows between. Only when he had turned the corner did she enter her building again, climbing the stairs to her empty apartment with thoughts too tangled to unravel. The following week passed in a blur of change. Elena began her training at Harbor Lights, learning the intricacies of their specialty coffee drinks and locally sourced menu. Sophia proved to be a demanding but fair boss, with a clear vision for the cafe's role in Port Haven's evolving identity. Meanwhile, Jack settled into his temporary position at the community center. What had begun as basic maintenance quickly expanded to include teaching a twice-weekly computer skills class for seniors and helping with the after-school program. His technical knowledge, initially surprising, became an invaluable resource. They fell into an easy rhythm, crossing paths at the center or occasionally sharing coffee at Harbor Lights during Elena's breaks. Jack remained private about his past, but small details emerged. His preference for chess over checkers, his extensive knowledge of literature that matched Eleanor's own, his unexpected talent for fixing anything mechanical or electronic. It was during the second week that the first real suspicion arose. Lily, Eleanor's young tutoring student, had brought her older brother Marcus to the center. A sullen teenager with a talent for computers, Marcus had reluctantly agreed to help set up a basic website for the community center's program. While working alongside Jack, Marcus had glanced up from his laptop with a furrowed brow. "You know, you look familiar, like someone I've seen before." Jack had tensed visibly. "I have that kind of face," he'd replied, too casually. Generic features. Marcus hadn't seemed convinced, but had dropped the subject. Later, however, Eleanor had overheard him telling his sister that he'd seen Jack get into a sleek black car parked down the block, a vehicle at odds with his apparent circumstance. When Elena had gently mentioned this to Jack, he'd deflected with practiced, helping a friend with some errands, he'd explained. Nothing mysterious about it. But Elena had seen the wariness in his eyes, the careful way he'd changed the subject. The incident had planted a seed of doubt, though not precisely suspicion. There was clearly more to Jack's story than he'd revealed, but Elena sensed no malice in his secrecy, only caution, and perhaps shame. Today, nearly 3 weeks after their first meeting, Eleanor arrived at the community center to find it in a state of controlled chaos. Chairs had been arranged in a semicircle in the main room, and Ms. Alvarez was directing volunteers with clipboard in hand. "What's happening?" Eleanor asked, setting down her bag.
"Emergency meeting, Ms. Alvarez. The board's coming at noon."
"The board? Why?" Ms. Alvarez lowered her voice. "Funding issue. Again. The grant we were counting on fell through, and now there's talk of cutting programs." She glanced toward the storage room, where Jack was helping a volunteer hang a whiteboard, including our temporary staff. Elena felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. The community center operated on a perpetual shoestring budget, relying on grants, donations, and the occasional fundraising event. Without those, the services they provided, free tutoring, senior programs, the food pantry, were constantly at risk. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough," Ms. Alvarez sighed. "We might have to close for renovations if we can't address some of the building code violations. The inspector was here yesterday, found all sorts of problems with the electrical system and plumbing." "But that's not fair," Elena protested. "This building is over 50 years old. Of course there are issues." "Fair doesn't enter in," Ms. Alvarez replied wearily. "Either we fix the problems or we close until we can afford to." Elena glanced again at Jack, who was now helping an elderly man set up a laptop. In just 3 weeks, he'd become an integral part of the center's daily operations. The thought of him losing this newfound stability made her chest tighten uncomfortably. The board meeting proved to be every bit as grim as Ms. Alvarez had predicted. 6 stern-faced men and women in business attire presented a detailed list of the center's financial shortcomings and structural deficiency. The conclusion seemed foregone. Unless $75,000 could be raised for critical repairs, the center would close indefinitely at the end of the month. Throughout the presentation, Elena watched Jack, who sat quietly in the back of the room. His expression revealed nothing, but his posture had grown increasingly tense as the meeting progressed. When the board opened the floor for questions, he remained silent, though Eleanor could almost see the thoughts racing behind his carefully neutral expression. After the meeting, as volunteers dispersed in somber groups, Eleanor found Jack in the kitchenette, staring out the small window that overlooked an empty lot behind the building. "Pretty bleak, huh?" she said, leaning against the counter beside him. Jack turned, his expression unreadable. "They've already decided to close, haven't they? The opportunity to raise funds is just a formality." Elena nodded reluctantly. "I think so. No one can raise that kind of money in 2 weeks, especially not in Port Haven. What happens to the programs, the people who depend on them?"
"They'll try to relocate some services to the library or the church," Eleanor, "but it won't be the same. This place," she gestured around them, "it's more than just programs. It's a home for people who need one."
Jack was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the window. "What if the money could be raised?" he asked finally. Elena smiled sadly. "It would take a miracle, or a very generous benefactor."
"Then, I need to go out for a..."
"Everything okay?" Elena asked, concerned by the sudden shift in his... "Yes," Jack said, with a certainty that surprised her. "I think maybe it will be." Before she could question him further, he was gone, leaving Elena with the distinct impression that a decision had been made. Though what decision and to what end, she couldn't begin to guess. Jack didn't return to the center that. When Elena finished her volunteer shift and headed to Harbor Lights for her evening training, she found herself scanning the streets for his familiar figure, but there was no sign of him. The cafe was busy, full of locals enjoying the early evening specials and tourists seeking shelter from the breeze that had picked up off the water. Elena moved through her duties with practiced efficiency, though her thoughts remained with Jack and the uncertain future of the community center. Near closing time, as she wiped down tables and restocked supplies, Sophia approached with an envelope in hand. "This came for you," she said, holding it out. "A man dropped it off about an hour ago." Elena accepted the envelope with a puzzled frown. Her name was written on the front in a neat, precise hand she didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing an address and a time, 8 p.m., at the old boathouse near the northern edge of the harbor.
Did he leave a name? Elena asked.
Sophia shook her head. "Just said it was important that you get it tonight." Elena stared at the note, indecision warring within her. The location was isolated, especially after dark. Common sense warned against meeting an unknown person in such a place. And yet... "Do you need to go?" Sophia asked, noting her expression. "We're almost done here. I can finish up." "Absolutely," Sophia assured her. "Just be careful, okay? And text me when you're safely home." "I will," Elena promised. "Thank you." The boathouse stood at the edge of what had once been Port Haven's thriving shipyard. Now it was one of several abandoned structures awaiting either demolition or the unlikely prospect of redevelopment. The surrounding area was eerily quiet. The only sounds the gentle lapping of waves against weathered pilings and the distant cry of seabirds settling. Elena approached cautiously, her phone clutched in one hand, pepper spray in the other. The door of the boathouse stood slightly ajar, a faint light visible within. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open. The interior was larger than it appeared from outside, with high ceilings and walls lined with dusty shelves and hooks once used for tools and equipment. In the center, beneath the glow of a battery-powered lantern, stood Jack. "You came," relief evident in his voice. "You didn't give me much to go on," Elena replied, lowering the pepper spray but keeping it. "What is this about, Jack?" Instead of answering directly, Jack gestured to a worn table where several documents were spread out. "I need to show you something." Elena approached cautiously, her gaze shifting between Jack and the papers before her. They appeared to be architectural drawings, detailed renderings of a building that looked remarkably like the community center, but with significant modifications and improvements. "What is this?" she asked, picking up one of the drawings. "A possibility," Jack replied. "A future for the center that doesn't involve closing its doors." Elena studied the plans more carefully, noting the expanded kitchen, the renovated classrooms, the new roof with solar panels. "These are beautiful, but, Jack, this would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, far more than what the board is asking for repairs."
"I know," Jack said quietly. "I can cover it."
Elena's head snapped up, disbelief etched across her features. "You can... what?" Jack took a deep breath, as if bracing him. "My name isn't just Jack. It's Jonathan Sullivan. Sullivan Technologies. I founded it 15 years ago, built it into a multi-billion-dollar company, then walked away 2 years ago when I realized what it was becoming." The name registered dimly in Elena's memory. Headlines she'd glimpsed, a vague recollection of a tech visionary who had mysteriously disappeared from public life. "You're..." she began, unable to complete the thought. "A coward," Jonathan finished for. "Someone who ran away when things got complicated instead of staying to fix the problems I'd helped create." Elena shook her head, trying to reconcile the man before her with the wealth and power he claimed. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm tired of hiding, and because I need your help." "My help?" Elena echoed incredulously. "What could I possibly help you with?" Jonathan's expression softened. "Everything. The center needs more than just repairs, Elaine. It needs a vision for the future, a purpose that will sustain it beyond this crisis. I have the resources, but you..." He gestured to the community center plan. "You have the heart, the understanding of what this..." Elena stared at him, a jumble of emotions coursing through her. Confusion, disbelief, a strange sense of betrayal mixed with something warmer she wasn't ready to name.
"Why didn't you tell me sooner? Would you have treated me the same if... or would I have been the eccentric millionaire
The question struck home. Elena recalled her own actions that first day. The offered bread, the umbrella, the simple kindness she'd extended without thought of reward or recognition. Would those gestures have felt different if she'd known his true identity? "I don't know," she admitted, "but I deserved the chance to decide for myself."
"You're right," Jonathan acknowledged. "I should have trusted you sooner, but I needed, I needed to be just Jack for a while, to remember what it felt like to be valued for something other than my bank account or my company.
Elena moved away from the table, creating distance as she processed his revelation. So, what happens now? You write a check, save the center, and then what? Back to your real life? A flash of hurt crossed Jonathan's face.
This is my real life, Elena. These past weeks, fixing things at the center, helping with the programs, getting to know you and Mr. Rossi and the others, they've been more real than anything I've experienced in years. Then why the secret? Why this? She gestured. Why not just tell everyone who you are? Make your donation publicly? Because money changes. It creates expectations, obligations. People know you have it. They stop seeing and start seeing. He ran a hand through a gesture Elena had come to recognize. I wanted to help the center without it becoming about me.
Elena considered his words, recognizing the truth in them even as she struggled with her own sense of having been misled. And my role in all this? What exactly are you asking me to do? Jonathan picked up one of the architectural rendering. These plans, they're just ideas, possibilities, what the center could become with the right resources and the right leadership. He held her gaze steadily. I want you to help shape that future, Elena, to take these raw materials and create something that truly serves this. Why me? Elena asked, genuine confusion in her. I'm not an architect or a businessman. I'm just
someone who gives half her brother's children and helps elderly, someone who sees the best in you. Understand?
The sincerity in his voice made Elena's throat tighten unexpectedly. She turned away, needing a moment to compose herself. There's something else, Jonathan something I want to show you. He led her to another table, where a different set of documents lay spread out. These weren't architectural plans, but business proposals, detailed projections for a bookshop cafe located in a currently vacant storefront near the harbor. What is this? Elena whispered, though she already knew the answer.
Your dream, or at least a version of. I took what you told me that night after we visited Mr. Rossi and developed it.
Elena stared at the papers before her, seeing her casual mentions translated into detailed projections, floor plans, inventory suggestions. How did you...
I've started a few businesses in my time, Jonathan replied with a The bones of your idea were solid, it just needed some structure.
And why are you showing me this? Elena asked, though a part of her already knew and feared the answer.
Because I believe in it, Jonathan said, and I believe in you. I want to invest in your bookshop, Elena. Not as a charity, but as a business partner who recognizes a good opportunity.
Elena stepped back, wariness replacing her initial wonder. This is why you got me the job at Harbor Lights, isn't it? To see if I could handle running a business. Jonathan's expression confirmed her suspicion. Sophia is an old friend. I may have mentioned that I knew someone with excellent reference and a natural way with people.
So that wasn't luck or my qualifications, Elena said, disappointment coloring her voice. It was your influence.
The opportunity came from me, Jonathan acknowledged. But what you've done with it, how quickly you've learned, how the customers respond to you, that's all you, Elena. Sophia wouldn't have kept you if you weren't exceptional, regardless of my recommendation. Elena shook her head, conflicting emotions making it difficult to think clearly. It's too much, Jonathan. The center, the bookshop. You're talking about completely changing people's lives. My life.
Is that such a bad thing?
It's not about good or bad, Elena replied. It's about agency, about making our own choices, not having them made for us, however well-intentioned.
Understanding dawned in Jonathan's eyes.
You think I'm trying to rescue you, to play the wealthy benefactor.
Aren't you? Elena challenged.
No, Jonathan said firmly. I'm trying to invest in potential I recognize, in people and ideas I believe in. There's a difference.
Elena wasn't convinced. It feels like charity. Then I've explained it poorly, Jonathan. This isn't about me swooping in to save the day, Elena. It's about partnership, collaboration, your vision and my resource, working together to create something meaningful.
Elena glanced again at the community center plans, then at the bookshop proposal. Despite her misgivings, she couldn't deny the pool of possibility they represented, not just for her, but for the entire community.
I need time to think about all this.
Jonathan nodded, relief evident in his posture. Of course, take whatever time you need. As Elena turned to leave, a new thought occurred to her. The community center board meets again tomorrow to discuss the closure. Will you be there?
Do you want me to be? Jonathan asked, echoing their exchange from weeks before.
This time, Elena didn't hesitate. Yes, but as yourself. No more secrets. Jonathan held her gaze for a long moment before nodding. As myself, then. No more secrets. The walk home gave Elena time to process the evening's revelations. The quiet streets of Port Haven seemed unchanged, yet everything felt different. as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis, revealing new possibilities where before there had been only limitations. She thought of Jack, Jonathan, and the dual identity he'd maintained, of the genuine connections he'd formed with the seniors at the center, with Lily and the other children, with Ms. Alvarez and Mr. Rossi. Those relationships hadn't been built on his wealth or status, but on his willingness to help, to listen, to be present. And then there was the bookshop plan. Her dream, given form and substance by someone who believed it could succeed. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. What if she failed? What if she couldn't live up to the potential Jonathan saw in her?
By the time Elena reached her apartment, she'd made no decisions, but her thoughts had begun to clarify. Whatever happened next would require courage. The courage to accept help without surrendering autonomy, to reach for opportunity without forgetting where she'd come from.
She slept fitfully that night, dreams filled with bookshops that transformed into community centers, with bread broken and shared, with paths diverging and converging in patterns too complex to follow. Morning brought no easy answers, but a sense of resolve had settled in Eleanor's chest. She dressed carefully for the board meeting, choosing a simple blue dress that had once belonged to her mother. A tangible connection to her past as she faced a future suddenly full of uncertainty. The community center was unusually quiet when she arrived. Ms. Alvarez stood in the reception area, a strange expression on her face.
"Elena," her voice pitched low. "Something's happening. The board arrived early, and they're all in the conference room." She hesitated, as if still processing what she'd seen with Jonathan Sullivan.
"I know." Ms. Alvarez's eyes widened.
"You know that Jack is actually—" "He told me last night," Eleanor "It's complicated."
Before Ms. Alvarez could respond, the conference room door opened, and the board members filed out, their expressions a mix of shock, excitement, and lingering disbelief. Behind them came Jonathan, clean-shaven now, wearing a crisp button-down shirt and slacks that transformed him from the disheveled handyman they'd known into someone more closely resembling the tech entrepreneur he'd once been. His eyes found Eleanor immediately, a question in them that she answered with a small nod. Relief washed over his features. "Ms. Matthews," called Mrs. Henderson, the board president, "would you join us, please? Mr. Sullivan has made an interesting proposal that we'd like your input on." Elena entered the conference room, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. Jonathan stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Mr. Sullivan has offered to fund not only the necessary repairs," Mrs. Henderson, "but a complete renovation and expansion of our facilities. However, his proposal includes a significant change in our operational structure." She paused, glancing between Eleanor and Jonathan. "He's suggested that you take over as director of the center." Elena's breath caught. "Me? But I don't have the experience or qualifications." "You have something more valuable," Jonathan interrupted gently. "You have the trust of the people this center serves, and you have a vision for what it could become. A true community hub that addresses not just immediate needs, but long-term growth and sustainability." Mrs. Henderson nodded. "We've reviewed Mr. Sullivan's proposal, and while it's unorthodox, we find it compelling, especially in light of our current financial situation." "This isn't a decision to be made lightly," Eleanor said, struggling to maintain her composure. "The center's future affects too many people, which is precisely why we'd like your involvement." Mrs. Henderson, "Mr. Sullivan has made it clear that his support is contingent on community input and leadership. He's offering resources, not control." Elena looked to Jonathan, searching his face for confirmation. He met her gaze steadily, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It's your choice, all of it. The center, the bookshop, everything. It only happens if you want it to." In that moment, something shifted within Elena. A letting go of old fears, of the belief that aspiration was somehow selfish or impractical. She thought of her mother's words. Better to be good than great. Better to be kind than successful. But perhaps those weren't mutually exclusive choices. Perhaps greatness could emerge from goodness, and success could be a form of kindness when shared. "I need to think about this," she said finally, "and I'd like to discuss it with the staff and volunteers before making any decisions." Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. "A wise approach. We'll reconvene tomorrow afternoon then." As the board members gathered their belongings and departed, Elena remained in the conference room with Jonathan. For a long moment, neither spoke, the weight of possibility hanging between them. "Why did you really come to Port Haven?" Eleanor asked finally. "Of all the places you could have gone after leaving your company, why here?" Jonathan considered the question, his gaze drifting to the window that overlooked the harbor. "I wasn't looking for anything specific, just somewhere quiet, somewhere I could disappear for a while. His expression softened. But then, I found something I wasn't expecting.
What? A reminder of what matters, of why I started my company and to solve problems, to make a difference. I'd lost sight of that somewhere along the way.
Elena studied him, seeing beyond the successful entrepreneur to the man who'd fixed the copy machine and taught seniors how to use email, who'd remembered a child's birthday and brought a homemade cake when no one else had.
And the bookshop, she asked, was that just an impulse or an investment in someone I believe in? Jonathan, no different from any other business decision I've made, except that this one matters more some.
The honesty in his voice made Eleanor's chest tighten. She thought of all the time she'd pushed away opportunity out of fear. Fear of failure, fear of wanting too much, fear of disappointment. I'm not used to accepting help, she admitted. Giving it, yes, but receiving it feels
vulnerable, Jonathan. I understand. It's why I didn't tell you who I was at first. Being needed is easier than need.
The insight surprised her, this recognition of a shared struggle beneath their vastly different circumstances. Perhaps they weren't so different after all, both hiding parts of them, both seeking purpose beyond mere survival. I should go, Eleanor, suddenly aware of how long they'd been alone together. I need to talk to Ms. Alvarez and the others before tomorrow's meeting. Jonathan nodded. Of course. As Elena reached the door, she paused, turning back to him. Thank you, she said quietly. Not for the money or the plans or any of that, but for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Jonathan's smile was gentle, tinged with something that might have been tenderness. You did the same for me, Elena. That day in the rain. The following 24 hours passed in a blur of conversations, questions, and carefully considered possibilities. Elena met with the center's staff and key volunteers, explaining Jonathan's proposal and soliciting their input. To her surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive, though not without practical concerns about implementation and sustainability. Ms. Alvarez, after her initial shock, had become Eleanor's strongest advocate. You've always been the heart of this place. It's about time you were recognized. Mr. Rossi, upon hearing the news, had laughed until tears streamed down his face. I knew there was something about him, he'd exclaimed. The way he fixed my sink. Too precise, too knowledgeable. No ordinary drifter has hands like that. Even Lily, who had no real understanding of the financial implications, had been delighted by the prospect of Elena running the center. Does this mean you'll be here every day? She'd asked, her eyes wide with hope. And we can have more books for the reading corner? By the time the board reconvened the following afternoon, Eleanor had reached a decision, one that had crystallized during a quiet moment that morning as she'd watched the sun rise over the harbor from her apartment window. The golden light had transformed the weathered buildings and fishing boats into something almost magical, revealing not just what Port Haven was, but what it could be. The conference room was full when Eleanor arrived. Board members, staff, even a few regular volunteers who had been invited to witness what everyone now understood would be a pivotal moment for the center. Jonathan sat quietly at one end of the table, his presence commanding yet somehow unobtrusive. He offered Elena a small nod as she entered, but made no other gesture of familiarity. Mrs. Henderson called the meeting to order, then turned to Elena. Ms. Matthews, we understand you've had time to consider Mr. Sullivan's proposal. We'd like to hear your thoughts before we proceed with any formal decisions. All eyes turned to Elena. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. First, I want to thank the board for your stewardship of the center over the years, she began. The services provided here have been a lifeline for many in our community, myself included. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Mr. Sullivan's offer is extraordinarily generous, and his vision for the center's future is both ambitious and thoughtful. After speaking with staff and volunteers, I believe it represents a tremendous opportunity, not just for the building itself, but for expanding our programs and reaching more people in need. Elena glanced at Jonathan briefly before continuing. However, I have some modifications to suggest. Rather than stepping directly into a director role, I propose a phased transition, allowing me time to complete formal training in nonprofit management while working alongside Ms. Alvarez, whose experience is invaluable. Ms. Alvarez, seated near the back, smiled encouragingly. Additionally, Elena continued with growing confidence, I believe the renovation plans should include input from the people who use this center daily. The seniors who attend programs here, the children and families who rely on our services, their needs and perspectives should shape our decisions. Mrs. Henderson nodded thoughtfully. And the bookshop proposal? Mr. Sullivan mentioned that was also part of his overall vision. Eleanor took another steadying breath. The bookshop would be a separate venture, a for-profit business with a portion of proceeds supporting the center's programs. But it would provide a complementary space for community events, literacy initiatives, and local authors. She smiled slightly. And really good coffee. A ripple of appreciative laughter moved through the room. Mr. Sullivan, Mrs. Henderson turned to Jonathan. Your thoughts on these modifications? Jonathan leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. I think Ms. Matthews has improved the proposal significantly. The phased transition makes practical sense, and community input is essential for creating a space that truly serves its purpose. He met Elena's gaze across the table. I support these changes wholeheartedly. Mrs. Henderson looked pleased. Well then, it seems we have a path forward. The board will need to review the specifics and vote formally, but I think I speak for everyone when I say this partnership offers an exciting new chapter for the center. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing timelines, budgets, and next steps. Throughout, Elena felt a curious sense of calm, as if she had stepped into a role she had been preparing for without realizing it. The fear she had expected of inadequacy, of judgment, of failure, remained at bay, replaced by a quiet determination to honor the trust being placed in her. When the meeting finally adjourned, Elena found herself surrounded by well-wishers, board members offering congratulations, staff expressing excitement about the center's future. Ms. Alvarez hugged her tightly, whispering, "Your mother would be so proud," in her ear. Eventually, the room cleared, leaving Elena and Jonathan alone. He stood by the window, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. Elena shook her head. "No, just processing. It's a lot to take in." "It is," Jonathan agreed. "Life-changing decisions usually are." "I still don't understand," Elena said, moving to stand beside him. "Why me? Why Port Haven? There must be thousands of worthy causes you could support, communities with greater needs." Jonathan was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the harbor, visible through the window. "Do you know what I was doing the day you found me?" he asked finally. Elena shook her head. "I was contemplating leaving," he admitted. "I'd been drifting from town to town for months, never staying long enough to form connections. Port Haven was just another stop, somewhere to disappear for a while before moving." He turned to face her fully. "But then you knelt beside me in the rain and offered half your bread. You, who had so little yourself. And I realized I'd been looking at everything backward." "What do you mean?" "I walked away from my company because I felt it had lost its soul, become too focused on profit and growth at the expense of the people it was meant to serve." Jonathan's voice was soft but intense. "I thought I needed to escape from that world entirely, to find something real and authentic, somewhere far from wealth and power." He smiled ruefully. "But what I really needed was to remember why I built that company in the first place, to solve problems, to create something meaningful. Your kindness that day reminded me that meaning doesn't come from what you have or don't have. It comes from what you give." Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. "So, all this, the center, the bookshop, it's your way of giving back." "It's my way of moving forward," Jonathan corrected gently. "With purpose this time, not just ambition." They stood in companionable silence, watching the afternoon light play across the harbor wall. "What happens now?" Elena asked. "Now, we get to work." The transformation began slowly, then gained momentum. The first phase focused on critical repairs, updating the center's electrical, fixing persistent plumbing issues, replacing the leaking roof. Jonathan worked alongside the contractors, his hands once again becoming calloused and stained as he helped tear out old drywall and install new fixtures. Elena divided her time between her morning shifts at Harbor Lights, her new responsibilities at the center, and online courses in non-profit management that Jonathan had arranged through a prestigious university. The days were long and often exhausting, but filled with a sense of purpose that made the fatigue worthwhile. The community's initial wariness about Jonathan's sudden appearance and generosity gradually gave way to cautious acceptance, then genuine appreciation. He made no grand gestures, sought no public recognition. Instead, he attended town council meetings, joined the local business association, and volunteered at the center's food pantry, becoming part of Port Haven's fabric through consistent presence rather than dramatic philanthropy. 3 months after the board meeting that had changed everything, Elena stood in what would soon be her bookshop, a vacant storefront near the harbor that had once housed a chandlery. Sunlight streamed through newly installed windows, illuminating exposed brick walls and original hardwood floors that had been carefully "What do you think?" Jonathan asked, joining her in the center of the empty space. The contractor says we're ahead of schedule. We could be open by early fall. Eleanor turned slowly, taking in the potential of the space. The alcoves perfect for reading nooks, the wide front windows ideal for displays, the small courtyard in back that would make a charming outdoor seating area.
It's perfect. Better than I ever imagined.
Jonathan smiled, pleased by her reaction. The shelving will be installed next week, and the espresso machine you wanted is on order. Eleanor laughed. The espresso machine you insisted on. I was prepared to start with something more basic. Never compromise on coffee, Jonathan replied with mock seriousness. First rule of business. Their easy banter felt natural, the awkwardness of their early relationship long since replaced by a comfortable friendship built on shared purpose and growing trust. Jonathan had kept his word, offering resources and support without attempting to control the process. Elena had surprised herself with her capacity for leadership, discovering strengths she hadn't known she possessed. "Have you decided on a name yet?" Jonathan asked as they walked through the space, discussing placement of furniture and fixtures. Elena nodded. "Harbor Pages." She glanced at him uncertainly. "What do you think?" "I think it's perfect," Jonathan said, echoing her earlier words. "Local, meaningful, memorable."
"And the logo will incorporate the lighthouse." Shared the vision. "I've been working with a graphic design that captures both the maritime heritage."
Jonathan listened attentively as Eleanor outlined her plans for the shop's opening months. Local author events, children's story hours, book clubs, writing workshop. Her natural inclination toward community building had found perfect expression in the creation of this space that would be both business and gathering place. "You know," he said when she paused for breath, "when I suggested this venture, I thought I'd need to provide more guidance. Business plans, marketing strategies, operational..." He shook his head in admiration. "But you've taken to it like you've been doing this your whole life." Eleanor felt a flush of pleasure at the praise. "I've had good teachers. You, Sophia, even my business class," she smiled. "And I've wanted this for so long. I just never thought it would be possible." The best dreams are like that, Jonathan. They feel impossible until suddenly they're inevitable. As they left the bookshop and walked along the harbor, Elena was struck by how much had changed in just a few months. Not just in her circumstances, but in her sense of self. The woman who had once apologized for taking up space now moved through the world with quiet confidence, making decisions that affected not just her own life, but the lives of many in her community. "Oh," Jonathan said suddenly, reaching into his jacket pocket. "I almost forgot. This came today." He handed her an envelope bearing an official-looking seal. Elena opened it curiously, then gasped. "The grant was approved. The center's getting the full funding for the after-school program expansion." Jonathan grinned. "Congratulations, that was all you. Your proposal, your vision. With some coaching from you," Eleanor reminded him. She impulsively hugged him, too excited to maintain her usual reserve. "This means we can double the number of children we serve, hire qualified tutors, provide healthy snacks." Jonathan returned the embrace briefly before stepping back, his expression warm. "I knew you could do it."
"We did it together," Elena corrected, "like everything else."
They continued their walk, discussing the implications of the grant and planning next steps. As they passed harbor lights, Sophia waved through the window, gesturing for them to come inside.
"I have news," she announced as they entered the cafe. "Remember that regional food magazine that was here last month? They're featuring harbor lights in their fall issue, and they specifically mentioned the community partnership with the center's culinary program. The program had been Eleanor's idea, using the cafe's kitchen during off hours to teach cooking skills to unemployed residents, with Sophia providing instruction and Jonathan funding the necessary equipment and ingredients. "That's wonderful," Eleanor exclaimed. "The exposure will be great for both the cafe and the program." "And I have you two to thank," Sophia said, her expressions Jonathan for the initial push and Eleanor for the partnership concept. As they celebrated with coffee and Sophia's signature lemon tarts, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the interconnected web of relationships and initiatives that had grown from that rainy afternoon months ago. The center's renovation was nearly complete. The bookshop was taking shape and new programs were extending their reach throughout the community. Yet for all the external changes, it was the internal transformation that struck Eleanor most profoundly. She had discovered a capacity for leadership she'd never recognized in herself. An ability to envision possibilities and inspire others to help realize them. And Jonathan, the once reclusive millionaire, had found a way to use his wealth and talents purposefully, becoming an integral part of the community rather than a detached benefactor.
Later that evening, as they sat on the community center's back patio beneath string lights Jonathan had installed the previous weekend, Eleanor broached a subject that had been on her mind for weeks. "The Sullivan Foundation," she said, watching his reaction carefully. "That's your next project, isn't it?" Jonathan looked surprised. "How did you know?" "The paperwork on your desk," Elena admitted. "I saw it when I brought in the community survey results, and it makes sense. A more structured approach to your philanthropy." Jonathan nodded slowly. "I've been considering it. A way to expand what we're doing here to other communities with similar needs. Small towns with big potential but limited resources. It's a wonderful idea," Eleanor said sincerely. But you're worried about what it means for Port Haven," Jonathan finished for the projects here. Elena nodded, a familiar anxiety tightening. "Will you be leaving? Moving on to the next town once everything here is established?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither had openly acknowledged. Their partnership had evolved into something more complex than professional collaboration. A deep friendship, edged with feelings Eleanor had been careful not to examine too closely. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant lighthouse that swept its beam rhythmically across the darkening. "I bought the Peterson house," he said finally. "The Victorian on Maple Street with the wraparound porch. The sale closes next week." Elena's breath caught. The Peterson house was one of Port Haven's grandest old homes, a local landmark that had stood empty for years as the elderly owner's children argued over its fate. "You're staying," she said softly, relief and something warmer unfurling in her chest. "I'm staying," Jonathan confirmed, meeting her eyes. "Port Haven isn't a project to me anymore, Elena. It's home. The foundation will have offices in the city, but my place is here." The simple declaration settled over Elena like a blessing. She hadn't realized how much she'd feared his eventual departure until the possibility was removed. "I'm glad," she said simply. Jonathan smiled, then changed the subject to safer ground. The center's upcoming fall festival, the bookshop's opening timeline, the new reading program Elena had developed for the elementary school. But something had shifted. An understanding reached without words. 2 weeks later, Harbour Pages opened its doors to the public for the first time. The morning dawned clear and cool, with just enough autumn crispness in the air to make the shop's interior warmth inviting. Elena had been awake since 5, arranging last-minute displays and ensuring everything was perfect for the grand opening. By 9 o'clock, a small crowd had gathered outside. Friends, neighbors, curious locals drawn by the transformation of the long vacant storefront. Mr. Rossi stood at the front, leaning on his cane but beaming with pride. Ms. Alvarez had brought a contingent from the community center, including Lily and her brother Marcus. Even grumpy Mr. Chambers, Elena's former landlord, hovered at the edge of the gathering, his perpetual scowl softened to mere skepticism. Jonathan arrived moments before the scheduled opening, carrying a small wrapped package. "For luck," pressing it into Elena's hands. Inside was a first edition of Jane Austen's Persuasion, Elena's favorite novel, a fact she'd mentioned only once during a late-night conversation months earlier. "Jonathan," she breathed, carefully opening the aged cover. "This is too much." "It's exactly right," he countered gently. "A story about second chances and renewed hope. Like us. Like Port Haven." Before Eleanor could respond, it was time to unlock the door. As she turned the key and welcomed the first customers to Harbour Pages, she felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, but the beginning of a new chapter in a story still unfolding. The day passed in a blur of activity. Ringing up sales, recommending books, serving coffee, introducing customers to the shop's features. Jonathan stayed throughout, quietly helpful, restocking shelves, chatting with visitors, occasionally catching Elena's eye across the room with a smile that made her heart stutter in its rhythm. By closing time, Eleanor was exhausted but exhilarated. The shop had exceeded all expectations for its first day. Sales had been strong, the response overwhelmingly positive, and the community's embrace of the new business immediate and enthusiastic. "Congratulations." "We did it," Elena corrected, a pattern now between. "I couldn't have done this without you. You would have found a way," Jonathan said with certainty. "Maybe not as quickly or on this scale, but you would have gotten here eventually. That's who you are, Elena. Someone who persists, who builds, who creates possibility out of nothing." The praise made her uncomfortable, as it always did. "I'm just extraordinary," Jonathan finished for. "Though you're the last person." He stepped closer, his expression serious. "Do you remember what you asked me that night at the boathouse? Why I chose Port Haven of all places?" Elena nodded, the memory vivid despite the months that had passed. "I told you I wasn't looking for anything specific," Jonathan. "That wasn't entirely true. I was looking for something, though I couldn't have named it then. He took a deep breath. I was looking for a place where I could matter as a person, not as a fortune or a famous name. A place where I could rebuild myself from the ground up. He gestured around the bookshop, at the carefully curated shelves, the comfortable reading nooks, the small cafe area where locals had already begun to gather regularly.
You gave me that, Elaine. Not just by helping me that day but by seeing really me afterward, by holding me accountable, by challenging, by believing I could be, or my bank account.
Eleanor felt tears pricking at the corners of her. You gave me just as much. You helped me believe in possibilities, in myself. Jonathan reached for her hand, his touch gentle but certain. I don't want to be just your business partner or your friend, Eleanor. I want... The moment was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. They turned to see Lily's face pressed against the glass, her expression urgent. Beside her stood her mother, apologetic but clearly concerned. Elena hurried to... Lily, what's wrong?
It's Mr. Rossi, the girl said breathlessly. He collapsed at the center. The ambulance took him away. Ms. Alvarez said to find you right away.
Fear clutched at Eleanor's heart. Mr. Rossi was more than a neighbor. He was family in all but blood, the grandfather she'd never had.
I'll drive, said immediately. Already, we'll go straight to the hospital.
The next hours passed in a haze of sterile corridors, hushed conversations with medical staff, and the peculiar timelessness of hospital waiting room. Mr. Rossi had suffered a stroke. Significant but not catastrophic, the doctors explained. With proper care and rehabilitation, he could recover much of his function, but he would need support. His independent living days were likely over.
He has no family, Eleanor explained to the social worker assigned to the case. Just me, and the community.
And me, Jonathan added quietly, his hand finding hers in a gesture that had become familiar over the anxious hours. We'll make sure he gets whatever care he needs. When they were finally allowed to see Mr. Rossi, Eleanor was shocked by how small he appeared in the hospital bed, surrounded by monitors and tubes. His eyes brightened when he saw her, though, and he managed a weak smile. Elena, he whispered, his voice slurred but intelligible. Don't look so worried. Takes more than this to finish old Rossi. Elena blinked back tears, squeezing his hand gently. You scared us. Pfft, Mr. Rossi dismissed her concern with a weak wave. Just wanted attention. Your bookshop opens, everyone forgets about me. The joke, feeble as it was, released some of the tension that had been building in Eleanor's chest. Never, she promised. Your family. Mr. Rossi's gaze shifted to Jonathan, who stood quietly at Elena's side. You, he said, his expression suddenly serious. You take care of her. Jonathan nodded solemnly. Always. Good. Seemingly. His eyes drifted closed, and Elena felt panic rise within her until a nurse assured them he was simply sleeping, exhausted from the day's events. They left reluctantly, with promises to return first thing in the morning. The drive back to Port Haven was quiet, both Eleanor and Jonathan lost in their own thoughts. The euphoria of the bookshop's opening had been replaced by a sobering reminder of life's fragility and the deeper connections that transcended business partnerships and community projects.
He'll need full-time care, breaking the... at least during his recovery.
We'll arrange it, Jonathan assured. Whatever he needs, home health aides, rehabilitation, equipment for his apartment, it's covered. Elena nodded gratefully, too emotionally drained to protest his generosity. Thank you. When they reached her apartment building, Jonathan walked her to her door, his presence a steady comfort in the face of the evening's turmoil. Try to get some rest, he said as they reached her apartment. I'll pick you up at 8 tomorrow to go back to the hospital. Elena nodded, fumbling with her keys. The events of the day, from the high of the bookshop opening to the terror of Mr. Rossi's collapse, had left her emotionally raw, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. Jonathan, turning to face him, what were you going to say? At the bookshop, before Lily came. Jonathan's expression softened. It can wait. You have enough to process, right? No, Eleanor insisted, surprising herself with her certainty. I want to know. Need to know. Jonathan studied her face for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. Then, with a decisiveness that reminded her of the business leader he had once been, he took her hand in. I was going to say that I'm in love with you, that I have been since that day in the rain when you knelt beside a stranger and offered kindness without expectation of... The declaration hung in the air between them, transforming the familiar hallway into a threshold of possibility. Eleanor felt her heart race, a counterpoint to the stillness that had settled over her mind.
You don't have to especially nothing that's happened. I just wanted... Why Port...
Eleanor looked up at him. This man who had entered her life as a mystery and become essential to it as a partner, a friend, and now, perhaps, something more. She thought of all they had built together over these months, of the trust that had grown between them, of the way he had supported her dreams without trying to shape them to his own vision. I don't need time. I've had months to understand what you mean. She stepped closer, closing the space between them. I love you too, Jonathan. Not for what you've given me or done for the community, but for who you are. For your kindness, your humility, your willingness to start over and build something meaningful. The smile that illuminated his face at her words was like sunrise after the longest night, a dawning of something new and full of promise. When he leaned down to kiss her, it felt like the most natural progression imaginable, not an ending, but a continuation of the story they had been writing together since that rainy afternoon that now seemed both yesterday and a lifetime ago. In the months that followed, their lives continued to intertwine and evolve. Mr. Rossi recovered slowly but steadily, eventually moving into the caretaker's cottage behind Jonathan's Victorian home, where he could maintain his independence while having support close at hand. He took particular pleasure in teaching Jonathan traditional Italian cooking, claiming that a man with money but no sauce is still a poor man. The community center thrived under Elena's leadership, its programs expanding to serve more residents and address deeper needs. The Sullivan Foundation began its work quietly, identifying other communities that might benefit from the model developed in Port Haven, not imposing solutions from outside, but nurturing growth from within. Harbor Pages became a gathering place for the town, hosting author events, community meetings, and quiet moments of connection over books and coffee. Elena's natural warmth and Jonathan's strategic thinking combined to create a business that was both financially successful and socially meaningful. Their relationship deepened with time, growing in complexity and understanding. They were not without challenges. Jonathan's wealth and Elena's independence sometimes created tension, and both carried wounds from their pasts that occasionally reopened. But they faced each difficulty with the same collaborative spirit that had characterized their professional partnership, finding solutions that honored both their individual needs and their shared vision. 1 year after the bookshop's opening, they stood together on the community center's roof deck, a new addition that offered views of the entire harbor. Below them, Port Haven glowed in the early evening light, storefronts with fresh paint, the renovated pier busy with visitors, new businesses filling once vacant spaces. It's changed so much, Elena observed, leaning against the railing. Sometimes I hardly recognize it. For the better? Jonathan asked, his arm around her waist. Elena considered the question seriously. Yes, she decided. It's still Port Haven, still has its soul, its character. But it's breathing again. Living instead of just surviving. Jonathan nodded in agreement. Like us. The parallel was apt. They had both been surviving rather than living when they first met. Eleanor trapped by circumstances and self-doubt. Jonathan adrift without purpose or connection. Now they stood together, transformed not by dramatic revelation, but by the steady accumulation of small choices, daily acts of courage and kindness. I have something for... Reaching in, he produced a small velvet box, not the traditional square of an engagement ring, but something larger, substantial. Eleanor accepted it curiously, opening it to reveal an antique key on a silver chain. What's this?
The key to the Peterson house, Jonathan explained. I want it to be our home, not just mine, if you're ready for that.
The offer represented more than shared living space. It was an invitation to fully merge their lives, to build a future together not just as partners in community projects, but as partners in every sense. Elena closed her hand around the key, feeling its weight and significance. I am. Ready, I mean. Jonathan's smile was tender as he took the necklace and fastened it around her neck, the key resting just above her heart. There's no rush, he assured her. We can take our time with the transition. Your apartment is part of your independence, your journey. I respect that. His understanding of her need for autonomy, for decisions that were truly her own, rather than responses to financial necessity or others' expectations, was one of the many reasons Elena had fallen in love with him. Jonathan had never tried to rescue her. He had simply created space for her to grow into her own strength. Maybe we could start with weekends, Elena suggested, and gradually move my things. Make it a process rather than a single step.
Whatever pace feels right, Jonathan. We have time.
As dusk deepened around them, lights began to appear across Port Haven, in homes and businesses, along the harbour walk, in boats bobbing gently at their mooring. Elena leaned into Jonathan's embrace, content in a way she had never imagined possible when she'd shared her bread with a stranger on a rainy afternoon. She thought of her mother's words, so long a limiting belief. Better to be good than great. Better to be kind then successful. She understood now that the dichotomy was false. Greatness could arise from goodness. Success, properly defined, was an extension of kindness, creating prosperity that lifted others, building structures that served more than the self.
What are you thinking? Jonathan asked, noting her reflective expression.
That sometimes the smallest gestures lead to the biggest changes, Eleanor replied, and that neither of us needed to be rescued. We just needed to be reminded of our own worth. Jonathan nodded, understanding without further explanation. A piece of bread offered in the rain.
A broken copy machine fixed without being asked, Eleanor added.
They stood together as darkness fell completely and the stars emerged above Port Haven Harbor. Neither spoke again for some time, content in the knowledge that their story, both individual and shared, continued to unfold in ways neither could have predicted, but both now embraced. What happened in the months and years that followed wasn't magic or miracle. It was the natural progression of lives lived with intention and compassion, sometimes messy, occasionally difficult, but ultimately meaningful. The community center expanded its reach. The bookshop became a regional destination. The Sullivan Foundation supported similar transformations in other small towns facing economic challenges. Elena and Jonathan married the following spring in a simple ceremony at the harbor, with Mr. Rossi proudly walking Eleanor down the aisle and Lily serving as flower girl. They honeymooned in Italy, visiting the small coastal village where Mr. Rossi had been born, before returning to the Victorian house that had become their home.
Their lives were not perfect. No authentic life ever is. There were arguments about money and priorities, moments of doubt and understanding. Jonathan sometimes struggled with the impulse to solve problems with his wealth rather than allowing natural processes to unfold. Elena occasionally into self-sufficiency when vulnerability would have them better.
But through it all, they remained each other's strongest advocates and most honest critics, partners in the truest sense, building something larger than themselves without losing their individual identity in the process. And it all began with a simple act of kindness. A woman kneeling in the rain beside a stranger, offering what little she had without expectation of return. Sometimes that's all it takes to change a life, or many lives. The weight of kindness, it turns out, is not a burden at all, but a foundation upon which everything else can be built, stronger and more lasting than anyone might imagine. If you find yourself wondering whether such small gestures really matter in a world so full of overwhelming problems, remember Elena and the man she knew first as Jack, then as Jonathan, finally as partner and beloved. Remember the community center that flourished, the bookshop that became a gathering place, the town that rediscovered its purpose. Remember, and then offer what you have, however modest it may seem, to someone who needs it. You never know what might grow from such a simple